Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
We're now going to have the two finalists, Adrienne Sue and Linda Lerner, read. And Linda's going to go first because we're doing it alphabetically. Linda's most recent books include When Death is a Red Balloon and A Dance Around the Cauldron, a prose work that consists of 9 characters during the Salem witch trials brought into our own times. Yes, the ducks were real and takes guts and years sometimes, from New York Quarterly Books, 2011 and 2015. Current journal publications include Maintenance, Gargoyle, Paterson Literary Review, Cafe Review, Trailer Park Wilderness Literary House Review, and many others. Linda Lerner is a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker, had to go on 19 different buses and trains to get here today, and her work is very electric and exciting. Let's welcome Linda Lerner.
I'm really honored that my book, Taking the F Train, has been chosen as a finalist. So thank you, Marie, and thank you all for coming. I really enjoyed hearing both of the other 2 poets. Okay, I've been having some voice problems, but hopefully you'll be able to understand. I'll be reading from different sections of my book, Taking the F Train. That's the train I live on, literally. And F train is the actual train, and it's a metaphor, obviously. Or maybe not obviously, I don't know. Okay. The Wild West comes east on city bikes, and that's a former New York City mayor's legacy. That was Bloomberg. That's when all this started. I jump out of the way as they come speeding out of the virtual world, wind-blown, sun-dappled, winding in and out of traffic into heart-stopping danger. When I first saw those bikes corralled in stalls throughout the city, I imagined horses, the awful smell of horse shit on the street, not the sanitized version of another era's getaway for anyone to jump on, pay at one of the many stations afterwards, and return to a cyber safe house. If along the way someone gets knocked down, hurt, a few keep riding as though nothing happened. Others stop bewildered when an ambulance is called, and couldn't be they were in their proper lanes, or when a truck door flies open, smacking a biker on the head, blood gushes out, and the border marking 2 worlds blurs. The man taken to a hospital, stitched up and released, doesn't quite know which side he's on, how he got so lost, why, or what he needed to break out from. Okay. Can you hear well enough?
Yes.
Okay, the freeway. I was doing, when books come out before the pandemic anyway, I was doing a lot of traveling, and in California I was on the freeway I don't drive at all, I never learned, and I was being driven to an event. And it seemed like another event might have happened also. The freeway. I'm a New Yorker, not a Westerner. Land is scarce where I come from, and I'm not used to this freeway I find myself stuck on with a man I barely know who offered to be my guide, telling me how well he's done to explain why he didn't make it and what he could have done differently, which makes no difference now. An accident up ahead, he says. Cars are veering from one lane to another, so close. Doesn't look like I'll make it anywhere. Says his wife is an accountant who comes from my part of the country. He visits once or twice a year. Suggests eating at his house rather than going out before driving me to my next event. When a car cuts too close to ours, he makes a sharp right to get out of the way, barely missing another car, asks if I'm in a relationship, noting how long it's been since. I check to make sure my seatbelt is secured and lie to get off that path. He's already left, saying, "They have it made," referring to a couple of Hollywood stars he knows. It was quite a trip. The next two poems refer to some voice problems I've been having lately. Nothing medically serious, but for me they are, because I like to give readings. So, The Shifting Ground. After my college boyfriend joined the Open Road Club, on a day he and a few others picked me up in a hearse they rented to carry their hiking gear. My mother's expression emitting seismic shock waves that drove me rushing out fast as I could. Never thought that I, who just went along for the ride, or because I was crazy in love and didn't want him alone with another female, doing what I wasn't ready for, that one day, from a height of several decades, I'd be looking down at a fractured fault line running through my life, hear a gravelly sound struggling to get back to where it had been, and I no longer could hear what I took for granted then. And thank you. And this is kind of a companion poem that goes with it. The to have and to have not years. Reminded of the time I smoked cigarettes and tried to sound like Bacall, walked around the house repeating, "You know how to whistle, don't you?" to a Bogart I've yet to meet, wanted nothing more than to sound like her on a stage. As I listened to old audio tapes of myself and tried to yank my voice out of whatever morass it has gotten stuck in over the years, wanting nothing more now than to sound like that woman in those tapes. Thank you. Thunder. Thunder. There was thunder. As soon as I left the house to get to the train, there was a crack of thunder and a downpour. So that's how this day started, but it seems to be ending nicely. Thunder. It slipped under our conversation next day, not ever reaching a crescendo, even trying. A prolonged undertone heard as I lay in bed and waited for that crack, the kind that happens when he'd say, "I want a divorce," or "There's someone else," only he doesn't say it. Pauses between them were like breaths in which but there wasn't any we. I was alone last night, listening for what I hear when we stop talking. That constant rumble in the background seemed as if it would go on and on, like quarrels with our parents and ourselves. Lasted maybe half an hour or a little more. Next day, I asked him, "Did you hear it?" "What thunder?" he asked. I heard nothing. It is a beautiful sunny day outside. We're sitting in an outdoor cafe, and I can still hear it so clearly. I'm going to read something, excuse me, a little to get into a different mood. The mayor, Mayor Adams had appointed a rat czar, I understand. He's obsessed with rats. Clearing the rats out of the city, I mean. And I guess along with it, roaches and all that other stuff that I've been dealing with at home. Now, this poem is called Rats, and I It's a longish poem, but not that long, but I thought I'd read it. I'm talking about all kinds of rats. The rats are out, a woman said. I just saw one behind the gate. There was an article about rats in this park and around here, the other woman said. I know, I joined in. My friend's doorman said that he had to close the door at night because the rats were trying to get in. People blamed construction going on down the block. That was a long time ago. Well, they're here now, the woman said. I considered moving away from the garbage disposal can. Early evening was also feeding time for mosquitoes. The two women got up and left. I didn't want to go back home yet. It was hot, my apartment stuffy, and about now they'd be sneaking out of holes in the 6 o'clock news. When I was growing up in Brooklyn, people spoke about rats where they worked. It seemed everyone had one. My father's rat was a man named Joe Cohn. That name kept coming up in his evening rants to my mother. I saw talk of rats in movies about the mafia. Someone spoke of a sign warning people of rat poison in an area I passed every day. There was some confusion when a person mentioned the increasing prevalence of rats here, and I thought they were referring to people. Once, when I complained of roaches, an exterminator helped me to plug up all the holes that they can get into the smallest space. Rats, too, I thought. I've seen them hovering around sabbatical holes in one college where I taught, and lurking in words like congratulations. If rats can get into anything, how would I know if they found a way to get inside me? Once I met the wife of a man I was having an affair with, and the way she looked at me was the way that other woman just looked when she spoke of seeing a rat. That was a long time ago. Thank you. Thank you. Where do I want to go to? Oh, I know. I might as well read a poem, one of my F-train poems. The loudest argument I ever heard began before they even entered an uptown F-train. A man and woman, late 30s, early 40s, stood by the door for a few minutes without moving. I've never touched hot coal, but think I know what it would feel like from the look in their eyes. Someone seated next to me got up and left. She took the seat. He kept leaning against the door, his hands full of rage, slammed down on a kitchen table that suddenly sprang up in the aisle between them. Hers flew at him, one after another. I saw dishes break, hundreds of recriminations, their eyes lock, no, bolt, against everyone else who acted as if nothing. The man's hands rammed down years, dredging up what hers threw right back at him. Fingers made small incremental movements up a long list. His hands sent scattering. Before I got off, I could swear I heard a baby crying, smelled alcohol, saw an apartment trashed, a couple intent on hurting each other as much as love is capable of. I think, is it clear they're deaf? They're working with their hands. They can't speak. That's the whole point. But, you know, it was like I could hear it, the way they looked and the way their hands moved. Okay, 40. This is a short one. A little sorry. I ease myself into the day to avoid another flare-up, like those arguments we had left over from the night before that could send me flying out of my skin, comes out in bursts now which I calmed down with a little sorry, but not too much. It's my life, my body, to do with as I wish, but a little sorry that I pretended everything is fine, pushed past through angry words you no longer can speak. I heard from every joint and nerve as I ran down the stairs to do what I always do. Only nothing is as always. You and my younger self remind me. Thank you. Okay, changing colors. I timed all this to 15 minutes, but if I run over, or you can stop me at any point.
No, you have to keep track, honey.
Okay. Well, no, that's why I time them before I read. Changing colors. She tries to tell him something he can't hear. What if it happened in other places, she asks, when he tells her to get out of her office more. A blue glass paperweight is now yellow, she says, when she took it out of the box, and a greenish enamel flower pot is trailing off into brown. But still green, right? He asks. She doesn't answer him. He's standing behind a wall of primary colors. Strong light hurts his eyes, and he can't see what it's doing to the colors. The gray his wife favors wearing, whiter now. The alleyways between them down where she's been slipping when she thought he didn't notice what he suspected but knew about the danger of straying off well-traveled mental roads. I can smell the earth seeping through the flower pot, she told him, and the yellow now smells like spring rain. And then he didn't want to hear any more, and then, but to lure her safely back to where nothing ever changed color. The next few poems deal with
Wait, honey, I think one more poem. We're getting past the time.
Okay. Which one should I read? Okay, left unfinished. Left unfinished. Bad writing, you'd say, of that 7-hour-long sentence you ran silently by me in the hospital. A trick you had to leave off writing in mid-sentence for something to complete the next day. Worked, you said. So I'm waiting, like a child who puts a tooth under her pillow for the tooth fairy to get and leave something in its place. I keep busy, sometimes grab a day out of the wrong tense, lift a piece of memory, and play with the facts to right a few wrongs. The grammarian and journalist would not have approved. The man who didn't know just how much would have understood. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's welcome Adrienne Sue. She author of 5 books of poems, Peach State, Living Quarters, Having None of It, Sanctuary, and Middle Kingdom. Her poems appear in many anthologies, including 4 volumes of Best American Poetry. She is the recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and she's a professor of creative writing and poet in residence at Dickinson College, which is in Pennsylvania, right? Yeah. Let's welcome the amazing Adrienne Sue.
Thank you. It's set up my timer here. It's amazing to be here. I met Maria, I think, 30-something years ago.
30 years ago.
Yeah, and so it's great to be reunited. And thank you, Smita, for all the organization, and thank you, everyone, for being here. Peach State is a book that's centered on place, and I feel like part of a club or something, because everybody has read place-centered or from place-centered books. And anyway, I also connect Linda to the F train. I did live in Brooklyn for a couple of years, and the only train was the F train. So Peach State is organized loosely like a cookbook. So I'm going to start with the first poem, which uses as a template the substitution chart that often appears at the end of a cookbook. Substitutions. Balsamic for Junjang vinegar. Letters for the family gathered. A Cuisinart for many hands. Petty burglars for warring bands. A baby's room for tight quarters. Passing cars for neighbors. Lawnmower buzzing for bicycle bells. Cod fillets for carp head to tail. Children who overhear the language for children who speak the language. Virginia ham for Jinhua ham, and nothing for the noodle man, calling as he bears his pole down alley and street, its baskets full of pickled mustard, scallions, spice, minced pork, and a stove he lights where the customer happens to be. The balance of hot, sour, salty, sweet, which decades later you still crave. A formula he'll take to the grave. Thank you. I may have made a mistake when I bought my last dining table. It's oval, and it's because my dining room is rectangular and sort of narrow. Because it's oval, it doesn't work with a Lazy Susan. I grew up with Lazy Susans, both at home and in restaurants, and I miss them. This poem is called The Lazy Susan. The Lazy Susan, in antiquity, would have been a fire. Drinking all night, the parents never get drunk. This is an ancient brew with nuts, seeds, fruit, to fuel the hours, to light a center. The tea dispenser's orange light reminds us they're in the dining room laughing in Chinese while we play Scrabble or Monopoly out here. They're telling stories we don't bother to record because the nights are long. We've heard them before. We don't comprehend the punchlines. They're tired. They live this way because of us. We live this way because of them. We don't comprehend the punchlines. They're tired because the nights are long. We've heard them before, telling stories we don't bother to record. While we play Scrabble or Monopoly out here, they're in the dining room, laughing in Chinese. The tea dispenser's orange light reminds us to fuel the hours, to light a center. This is an ancient brew with nuts, seeds, fruit. Drinking all night, the parents never get drunk. The Lazy Susan, in antiquity, would have been a fire. Thank you. So neither of those poems mentions Atlanta, but in my mind, most of the poems in this book are Atlanta-centered, although not all of them, not everything is. So while I was writing it, I was kind of traveling around the city in my mind, and also in reality, I was going there a lot. And one of the landmarks that kept sort of gnawing at me was the Atlanta airport. And I realized it was kind of a gateway, into which and out of which major things sort of emerged. It was where I was dropped off and picked up for college. It was where my parents picked up my cousins who immigrated from China, mostly as adults, and I didn't know them, so it was like these people coming from another planet. So anyway, I'll just say that I had such a hard time finding words that rhymed well with Atlanta that I used the airport code instead, ATL, which is also a nickname for Atlanta. And the title of the poem is a Southern saying. The title is, "Even when you die and go to heaven, you have to change planes in Atlanta." If your final destination is the ATL, welcome home. You're already in heaven. If you're bound for Huntsville, Valdosta, or Charleston, it'll take a bit longer from where you sickened or fell. Stop by for an ultimate supper at the Varsity Grill. Haunt the plane train, pride of Hartsfield-Jackson, even if your final destination is the ATL. Welcome home. You're already in heaven. Your card will not be charged for this airport hotel. We have unlimited flights, should you miss your connection. If, by mistake, you packed liquids or weapons, set them aside. We'll divert them to hell. And if your final destination is the ATL, welcome home. You're already in heaven. I think it's becoming common knowledge that, so this is maybe it's evident, maybe it's not yet, but the book is food-centered. And I think people are generally aware now that, for instance, General Tso's chicken was never a Chinese dish. It's kind of a Chinese-American invention, but now it does exist in China as an American import. And another such dish is the egg roll, which is the name of this poem. There's no such thing, except I ate enough of them that I would call them the hot dogs of my childhood. Had there not been so many hot dogs, it was the 70s. There's no such thing in China as the finished sentence, the name sounding as incongruous in Chinese as wok cake or hot fur sundae would in English. It might have been called the barbarian spring roll for its gargantuan dimensions, thick hide, neon sauce, mushy cabbage filling, and crude resemblance to something ethereal and much harder to make. Translucent, shattering layers of skin, the color and shape of a gold bar, filled, not stuffed, with slivered, crunchy vegetables, snow peas, carrots, bamboo shoots, black mushrooms, bean sprouts, and matchstick pork, a little egg brushed on as a seal. But the egg roll prefers to be defined on its own terms, like a cowboy pitching a tent at a crossroads, setting up his fire and fat, and growing rich on the legend of where he claims to be from. The doughier and greasier his product, the better. Because settlers need fuel to keep moving, the nation hasn't started watching television, and geniuses are those who make things from nothing, at least until they strike gold. The egg roll boasts of modest ingredients, a deliberate lack of artistry, and the ability to travel in a lunch pail in the back of a wagon, en route to its fortune, journeying away from the parent who keeps bringing up its honorable heritage, to which it will never live up, having found its audience. Thank you so much. Craig, a few minutes ago, gave me the courage to read this poem, which I have never read in a reading. It's called Not Your Grandmother's Sunday Dinner. My grandmother's Sunday dinner. So another of the landmarks in Atlanta that means a lot to me is also a controversial one, Stone Mountain. It's really a recreational park outside Atlanta, and it's also notorious for the gigantic sculpture on its face of Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Jefferson Davis. The carving was begun in 1923, and it stalled out about 5 years later. But after Brown v. Board of Education and the Civil Rights Movement, whoever had started the carving wanted to get it finished, and so the work resumed in 1964, was completed in 1972. This is called Personal History. The world's largest Confederate monument was too big to perceive on my earliest trips to the park. Unlike my parents, I was not an immigrant, but learned, in speech and writing, to represent. Picnicking at the foot and sometimes peak of the world's largest Confederate monument, we raised our cokes to the first Georgian president. His daughter was 9, like me, but Jimmy Carter, unlike my father, was not an immigrant. Teachers and tour guides stressed the achievement of turning 3 vertical granite acres into art. Since no one called it a Confederate monument, it remained invisible, like outdated wallpaper meant long ago to be stripped. Nothing at Stone Mountain Park echoed my ancestry, but it's normal for immigrants not to see themselves in landmarks. On summer nights, fireworks and laser shows obscured with sparks the world's largest Confederate monument. Our story began when my parents arrived as immigrants. Okay, so one other thing that I was doing to write this collection was to immerse myself in cookbooks and menus. I went to the Museum of Food and Drink in Brooklyn, where they were having an exhibit of Chinese restaurant menus, American Chinese restaurant menus that went back as far as the 1940s. And so I was just looking at what things had been called, what was available where. And one of the things that I started kind of noticing, and not that I hadn't ever noticed it before, but the lack of emphasis on desserts in Chinese cooking and why that is. And of course, one of the reasons is that you see sweetness and savory mixed together in Chinese food and a lot of other foods from around the world, but less so, I think, in the tradition that we get from French cooking. This is called savory versus sweet. It isn't the marriage that maps your course, only the divorce. One house has become all penance, the other indulgence. You struggle to resist what has grown to feel illicit, an appetite threatening obsession for delectation. What grows on trees tastes unfinished, an imitation of artifice. What court determined that sweetness be earned? Some chef with too much power once called mixing salt and sugar a form of barbarism. His decree, like any fashion, should have evaporated, but someone recorded it, so centuries, a continent away, your whole body hesitates to sweeten, even slightly, chicken soup or broccoli. There's enough complication in houses, in nations. His laws are as good as blue. The offender isn't you. I've got a minute and a half. Maybe I'll just stop. I can just stop. Like a really short one. Okay, one really short one. This is called My Life in Peaches. Anyone who's familiar with Atlanta knows that most of the downtown streets are named Peachtree. My life in peaches. Hard, green, ripened, fragile. Spice cling, briars all natural. Coffee cake, jello, cobbler, preserves. In watercolor with flowers, birds. Long life emblem, acidic sweet. Name of every downtown street. More Winn-Dixie than Samarkand. License plate, toll booth scan. Tiny carvings and tiny pits, Buddhas, houses, forests, fish. High artistic economy. Flesh has a price. Stones are free. That's all. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. What is your inspiration for writing these days?
Well, there are a couple of things. Sometimes it's personal. When my late partner died in 2018, there were poems dealing with that. Often I take what's happening around me, the pandemic for one. In fact, I have a chapbook of poems that are coming out in April dealing with 2020 to 2021, how it was and is. And then relate it to myself personally. So if it doesn't relate to something that's not in the news that I can connect with, I feel it isn't a poem. If it's just describing what's happening. So I find a way of connecting. So usually it can happen, something happens outside and it triggers something inside. So basically, I'm not a very spiritual person in that sense. a lot of my ideas come from outside and then move in. I passed a woman on the way to the gym, and she was sitting on a stoop, and on her lap were 3-4 pigeons that she was feeding. And I tried to take a photo of it, and then I thought she was a child. I moved closer and saw she's not a child, this is an older woman, and then moved a little more closer, and she looked up and said to me, take as much as you need, and referring to more, that there was something she was doing that I needed, that I was feeding on. So, and that became a poem, to give you an example of the way I work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How do you discover what to write about? Or does it come to you, or how does that happen?
That whole project, Peach State, came about because all these people I had grown up with, this generation of Chinese Americans, my parents' generation, because it was Atlanta, because it was the 60s and 70s, it was a very small community of Chinese Americans, so everybody knew each other. And I, as we all do, took for granted that those people were just always going to be around, and they had begun to disappear. I also noticed that Atlanta had become just an international food fest. I mean, every time I went there, I wasn't living there, I would just go crazy, especially with the Chinese food. And I thought, well, this began back when those people I grew up with arrived. There was almost nothing there in the way of Chinese food when they arrived. And I didn't want them to be forgotten. I didn't want that era to be forgotten. I liked what Atlanta had turned into. But I also wanted that old Atlanta to be remembered, not just for what it was, but for what it was making possible. And I just wanted those people's lives to be recorded in some way, even though there's no story of this person, story of that person in the book.
I think what you're doing is very important. What could you say to those folks who would like to write, not professionally, but just as a means of venting, just releasing all this energy? I mean, is there anything that you can share with, that person or persons?
I would say go to readings. I mean, reading a book is great, but I think there's nothing like having that live interaction. And what else? Get contemporary anthologies and look for the poets whose poems just jump out at you, because different poets are going to speak to different people. Find the ones you connect to and then pursue their work.